The ivory tower penthouse high above San Francisco was draped in the quiet, suffocating luxury of a 10-year marriage. Sasha reached out in the cold, silk-sheeted bed, seeking a familiar comfort, only to feel Clementine violently flinch away. "Don't touch me tonight," she snapped, her voice carrying a venom that felt entirely unearned. He pulled his hand back, staring at the glowing screen of her locked phone on the nightstand, a phone buzzing with a hidden, encrypted file transfer. "Not ever again," Sasha whispered into the dark. Discover the heavy cost of blind ambition and shattered trust. The fog rolling over the Golden Gate Bridge mirrored the dense, suffocating silence inside the ivory tower penthouse. It was past 2 in the morning. The city of San Francisco hummed faintly through the triple-glazed, floor-to-ceiling windows, a distant reminder of the world Sasha and Clementine had conquered together. Sasha lay on his side of the expansive, silk-sheeted bed, listening to the shallow, uneven breathing of his wife. Clementine was awake. He could feel the rigid tension radiating from her spine. As the lead IP lawyer for Pemberton Tech, Sasha was used to navigating high-stakes corporate warfare, but nothing exhausted him more than the battlefield of his own bedroom. Hoping to bridge the chasm that had been widening between them for months, Sasha slowly reached out. His fingertips barely grazed the sheer fabric of her nightgown before she recoiled as if burned. "Don't touch me tonight," Clementine snapped. The words were sharp, clipped, and laced with an inexplicable hostility that hung heavy in the chilled air of the room. Sasha slowly withdrew his hand, his jaw tightening. He didn't argue. He didn't ask why. The exhaustion in his bones was too profound for another midnight interrogation. "Not ever again," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that held the absolute weight of a finalized verdict. Clementine didn't reply. She merely pulled the duvet tighter around her shoulders, her silhouette rigid against the faint glow of the city lights. Throwing off the covers, Sasha stood up and walked toward the bedroom door. As he passed her nightstand, his eyes locked onto her phone. It buzzed, the screen lighting up the darkened room. It wasn't a standard notification. It was an encrypted file transfer alert from a server Sasha didn't recognize, flashing a warning: transfer complete. Source code V. A cold knot formed in his stomach. Clementine's flagship algorithm, the very patent Sasha had bled to secure for her 5 years ago, was sealed under layers of corporate security at Pemberton Tech. Why was she receiving encrypted source code in the middle of the night? And more importantly, why had she kept her titanium briefcase locked beside her vanity for the past 3 weeks, refusing to let even him, her lead counsel, review its contents? Sasha stepped out into the cavernous living room, heading straight for the sleek marble kitchen island. He poured himself a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the ambient light. He took a slow sip, letting the burn ground him. His mind drifted, against his better judgment, to Ianthe, to the scent of her vanilla perfume and the sharp, calculating intellect in her eyes. Ianthe never flinched from his touch. His phone vibrated in his pajama pocket. Setting the glass down, he pulled it out. It was a text from Ianthe. No words. Just a high-resolution photograph of a heavily redacted, yellowed blueprint. In the bottom right corner, barely legible but undeniable to an IP lawyer's trained eye, was a date. It was dated 2 full years before Clementine ever claimed to have invented the algorithm. Sasha stared at the screen, his blood running cold as the foundation of his entire life began to fracture. The Blue Moon Bar was a subterranean sanctuary of dim amber lighting and the low, mournful wail of a live saxophone. It was everything the ivory tower penthouse was not: warm, heavily shadowed, and forgiving of dangerous secrets. Sasha sat in a secluded velvet corner booth, rolling a condensation-slicked tumbler of bourbon between his palms. Across the small, scarred wooden table sat Ianthe. She wore a dark trench coat left casually open over a silk blouse, her dark hair catching the flickering light of the single votive candle between them. When she reached across the table, her fingertips gently covered the back of his hand. Her touch was searing, grounding him, a stark and painful contrast to the glacial rejection Sasha had endured in his own bed just 48 hours prior. You look entirely hollowed out, counselor, Ianthe murmured. Her voice was a soft, melodic drawl that effortlessly masked the sharp, relentless intellect of a seasoned tech journalist. Sasha offered a tired, cynical smile, turning his hand over to interlace his fingers with hers. Pemberton Tech is gearing up for the quarterly earnings call. The impending merger has Clementine paranoid. She has everyone on edge, including her lead counsel. He watched her eyes, dark, calculating, yet impossibly alluring, absorb the information. Ianthe slowly withdrew her hand to take a sip of her gin martini, leaving a faint crescent of crimson lipstick on the rim of the glass. It must be incredibly heavy, she said, leaning in closer. The intoxicating scent of vanilla and vermouth enveloped him, carrying the legal weight of a Silicon Valley genius. Tell me, Sasha, when she first brought you the algorithm, before the IPO, before the empire, did she ever seem surprised by her own brilliance? The question was woven so smoothly into the intimacy of their illicit rendezvous that it almost slipped past him. But Sasha's legal instincts, usually an impenetrable steel trap, flared to life. He vividly remembered the encrypted text message she had sent him nights ago, the photograph of the yellowed blueprint with the impossible date. He had spent 2 days convincing himself it was merely a piece of her aggressive journalistic research, perhaps a defunct claim from a patent troll. Yet here, in the secluded shadows of the jazz bar, the inquiry felt dangerously targeted. Clementine doesn't do surprise, Sasha replied carefully, his thumb tracing the heavy crystal rim of his glass. She operates on absolute certainty. The early days were just a chaotic blur of filing provisional patents and fighting off predatory venture capitalists. Ianthe's gaze dropped to his gold wedding band, which gleamed mockingly in the candlelight. She trailed a manicured nail along the cuff of his tailored suit, her touch lingering just long enough to make the pulse in his throat hammer. But surely, even absolute certainty leaves a paper trail, doesn't it? Rough drafts, whiteboards, abandoned code. She paused, her eyes locking onto his with a predatory softness. Or did the perfect, billion-dollar algorithm just fall seamlessly from the sky into her lap? Sasha's breath hitched in his chest. The unbidden image of the locked titanium briefcase beside his wife's vanity flashed vividly in his mind. He was a master at deflecting, at building impenetrable walls of plausible deniability. But staring into Ianthe's expectant face, he felt his meticulously constructed world fracturing, realizing with a sickening drop in his stomach that the woman he was risking everything for was hunting for a ghost he had helped bury. The penthouse was cloaked in the heavy, oppressive silence of 3 in the morning. Clementine had left hours earlier for a sudden, unscheduled emergency meeting in Silicon Valley, leaving Sasha entirely alone in the sprawling expanse of their home. He stood before the frosted glass doors of her private home office, a sterile sanctuary he rarely entered without a formal invitation. Tonight, however, the paranoid lawyer within him thoroughly overrode the loyal husband. He slipped inside, his bare feet silent against the cold hardwood floor. The room was illuminated only by the faint blue glow of dormant monitors and the steady, blinking LED lights of the secure server rack in the corner. His target sat squarely in the center of the massive glass desk, the titanium briefcase. Sasha approached it slowly, his ghostly reflection catching in the polished metal surface. He felt a sickening, potent cocktail of guilt and adrenaline pumping through his veins. As Pemberton Tech's lead counsel, he was bound by a sacred, ironclad oath to protect his client. But as a man whose marriage was rapidly disintegrating into a tangled web of lies, he desperately needed the truth. His trembling fingers hovered over the digital biometric lock. He wiped the keypad and tried the master override code he used for their shared vault. A harsh red light flashed. Access denied. Sasha paused, his mind racing through Clementine's cold, calculated psychological landscape. She was profoundly unsentimental, driven entirely by the inception of her algorithm. He punched in the date of their initial patent filing, the exact day their financial empire was truly born. The lock yielded with a heavy, metallic click. A green indicator light flared, cutting sharply through the dimness. Sasha popped the dual latches and lifted the heavy lid. Inside, instead of the encrypted solid-state drives he expected to find, lay a thick, weathered leather portfolio. He opened it carefully, the distinct, organic smell of aged paper and graphite hitting his senses, a jarring contrast to the purely digital fortress of Pemberton Tech. He slowly turned the crisp pages. They were covered in frantic, brilliant scribbles of complex mathematical equations and structural logic flows. But it wasn't the sheer brilliance that made the blood drain entirely from Sasha's face. It was the handwriting. Clementine's script was famously sharp, blocky, and meticulous. The handwriting leaping off these pages was chaotic, deeply slanted, and wildly expressive. His eyes darted to the bottom right corner of the first structural page. There was a date, stamped in faded blue ink, matching the exact, impossible time frame of the photograph Ianthe had anonymously sent him. Just below the date, Sasha found a set of sharply penned initials, M.S. It was not Clementine. Sasha pulled out his phone, bringing up the encrypted image from Ianthe, and held the glowing screen next to the physical page. The syntax of the foundational code, the structural logic, the sheer genius of the architecture, it was perfectly identical. Clementine had not merely refined a concept. She had stolen the core architecture wholesale, systematically erased the original creator's name from the legal filings, and expertly used Sasha's blind devotion to legitimize the monumental theft. Sasha sank heavily into the leather ergonomic chair, the ambient silence of the room suddenly deafening. He had built an impenetrable legal shield around a massive, billion-dollar lie. Worse, he realized with a creeping, icy dread, Ianthe knew exactly who M.S. was. And she had not seduced him for love. She had meticulously targeted him for the keys to the kingdom. The rain lashed violently against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ianthe's apartment at the Meridian, blurring the glittering San Francisco skyline into a smear of dull, watery lights. Sasha stood frozen in the center of her minimalist living room, the collar of his trench coat still damp. He had not bothered to take it off. The intoxicating warmth he usually sought in this space had vanished entirely, replaced by the sterile, freezing reality of his rapidly unraveling life. Ianthe emerged from her kitchen, holding 2 glasses of red wine. She paused, her dark eyes instantly reading the rigid set of his jaw and the hollow, haunted look in his posture. She set the glasses down on the glass coffee table with a soft, deliberate clink that echoed too loudly in the quiet room. "You found it," she said. It was not a question. Her voice lacked its usual melodic, seductive warmth. It was flat, professional, and chillingly calm. Sasha pulled his damp hands from his pockets, his knuckles white. "Who is M.S.?" he demanded, his voice barely a rasp over the rhythmic drumming of the storm outside. "I broke into my wife's vault tonight. I saw the leather portfolio, the dates, the handwriting." He took a slow, agonizing step toward her, the dual betrayal burning a hole straight through his chest. "You did not just send me a random patent troll's defunct claim. You knew exactly what was inside that titanium briefcase." Ianthe did not flinch, nor did she attempt to touch him. She walked over to her sleek mahogany desk, unlocked the top drawer, and withdrew a faded, translucent sheet of drafting paper. She walked back and handed the rudimentary printout of source code directly to Sasha. The syntax was visually undeniable. It was the absolute genesis of Pemberton Tech's billion-dollar algorithm, complete with complex margin notes written in that same chaotic, heavily slanted script he had just seen in his own home. His name was Mark Stevens, Ianthe stated quietly, crossing her arms over her silk blouse. He was a brilliant, deeply erratic systems architect. He worked out of a cramped, poorly ventilated garage in San Jose, worlds away from the polished corporate boardrooms Clementine dominates. Sasha stared blindly at the faded code, his sharp legal mind automatically calculating the devastating, catastrophic fallout. "And how exactly do you have his original draft?" Ianthe held his gaze, a brief flicker of something dangerously close to raw grief crossing her features before hardening into polished stone. Mark was a confidential source of mine. Years ago, before Clementine filed the patents, before she became a Silicon Valley icon, he trusted her with his core architecture to secure venture funding. Instead, she took the logic, locked him out of the main servers, and brought in a ruthless IP lawyer to legally sanitize the theft. Sasha felt the floor drop out from beneath him. The lawyer she was referring to was him. He had unknowingly built the impenetrable legal fortress that kept a stolen empire pristine and profitable. "You knew who I was the night we met at the bar," Sasha whispered, the crushing realization stealing the remaining oxygen from his lungs. The vanilla perfume, the lingering touches, the careful, probing questions. None of it was a serendipitous romance. "I needed the man holding the keys," Ianthe replied, her tone entirely devoid of apology. "You spent 10 years defending a lie, Sasha. Now you have to decide if you are going to die defending it." The morning sun sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Ivory Tower penthouse, casting unforgiving geometric shadows across the marble floors. Sasha stood by the kitchen island, staring blankly into a cup of black coffee. He had barely slept. The ghost of Mark Stevens's frantic handwriting and the hollow echo of Ianthe's revelation burned relentlessly behind his eyelids. The sharp click of designer heels against the hardwood signaled Clementine's approach. She entered wearing a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit, her hair pulled back into a severe knot. She looked every inch the untouchable Silicon Valley visionary, poised to finalize the largest corporate merger of the decade. She paused by the espresso machine, her cold eyes sweeping over Sasha's rumpled dress shirt and the dark circles beneath his eyes. "You were out all night," Clementine stated. It was not an accusation driven by jealousy, but a CEO's observation of an unpredictable variable. "And you missed the preliminary compliance review with the acquisition board yesterday." "I was managing a localized legal crisis," Sasha replied, keeping his gaze fixed on the counter. The lie tasted like dry ash. Clementine poured her espresso, the hiss of the machine filling the silence. "A crisis," she repeated, tasting the word. She crossed her arms. "Sasha, we are 10 days away from a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. The only crisis you should be managing is the airtight security of Pemberton Tech's intellectual property." Sasha looked up, forcing himself to meet her icy stare. He searched her flawless face for a microscopic crack of guilt, but found nothing. "The IP is completely secure, Clementine. It always has been, because I built the walls protecting it." "Then make sure you stay inside them," she said, her silken tone carrying the lethal weight of a scalpel. She took a deliberate step toward him. "You have been erratic. I do not care what fleeting distractions you pursue in the shadows of this city. But if your sudden lack of focus jeopardizes my merger, I will execute every punitive clause of our prenuptial agreement." The threat hung in the air, absolute. Sasha knew the prenup intimately. He had drafted its framework himself. It was a draconian document designed to leave the offending party with nothing, no equity, and an aggressive non-compete clause that would instantly end his legal career. "You built the legal walls, Sasha," Clementine whispered, reaching out to adjust his silk tie in a mocking gesture of domestic intimacy. "But I own the ground they stand on. Do not forget who gave you your kingdom. We survive this, or we drown together." She turned and walked out, leaving Sasha trapped in the pristine cage of his own making. The dim, oppressive lighting of the Blue Moon bar felt suffocating as Sasha slid into the secluded corner booth across from Ianthe. The jazz music, previously an alluring backdrop to their illicit romance, now sounded like a chaotic funeral dirge. The air between them was electric with unspoken tension, thick and sharp. Sasha did not bother ordering a drink. He laid his hands flat on the scarred table, his gold wedding band glinting under the votive candle. Ianthe watched him over the rim of her gin martini, her dark eyes devoid of the manufactured warmth she had so expertly deployed for months. She wore a sleek black turtleneck, her posture rigid, calculating the exact angle of Sasha's breaking point. "Clementine knows I am slipping," Sasha said, his voice barely a rasp over the wailing saxophone. He stared into Ianthe's eyes, searching for a trace of the woman he thought he had known. She has essentially promised to execute a financial and professional slaughter via the prenuptial agreement if I compromise the Pemberton Tech merger. Ianthe set her glass down, her crimson lips curving into a thin, humorless smile. Clementine is a ruthless visionary protecting her stolen empire. You should have expected nothing less from your wife. Sasha's jaw clenched, the anger tightening in his chest. I expected nothing less from her. But what about you, Ianthe? You have the draft of the source code. You proved to me that my wife stole the algorithm from Mark Stevens. He leaned closer, the scent of her vanilla perfume no longer intoxicating, but nauseatingly familiar. So what is the endgame? Are you going to publish the article and destroy us both? Or are you waiting for a payout? Ianthe did not flinch. She reached into her dark trench coat and pulled out a small, heavy envelope, sliding it across the table until it rested against Sasha's hands. There is no payout, Sasha. Her voice dropped to a chilling, deadened whisper, devoid of journalistic detachment. Open it, she commanded. Sasha broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was a single, high-resolution photograph. It was a candid shot of Mark Stevens, grinning wildly in front of a whiteboard covered in the chaotic, heavily slanted equations Sasha had found in Clementine's hidden vault. Standing next to him, her arm wrapped affectionately around his waist, was a much younger Ianthe. Sasha stared at the image, the blood draining entirely from his face as the pieces violently snapped together. Mark was not just a confidential source, Ianthe stated, her eyes locking onto his with a profound, unyielding grief. He was my fiancé. He was the brilliant architect Clementine seduced, robbed blind, and ruthlessly locked out of the Silicon Valley elite. Sasha felt his lungs constrict, his legal mind spinning wildly to process the sheer magnitude of the deception. He took his own life 3 years ago, Sasha. The exact day Pemberton Tech launched the IPO on the back of his stolen genius. Ianthe whispered, the venom finally breaking through her composed facade. You didn't just build a legal fortress around a thief. You legitimized my fiancé's erasure. She leaned forward, the flickering candlelight catching the absolute, terrifying resolve in her eyes. I never loved you, Sasha. I seduced the lead counsel to find the hidden blueprints. I needed the man holding the keys to unlock the vault. And now, you are going to hand me the murder weapon. The city of San Francisco lay completely obscured beneath a thick, impenetrable fog as Sasha stood alone in the center of Clementine's heavily secured home office. It was a sterile, freezing sanctuary of glass and steel, entirely devoid of warmth or humanity. It was the physical embodiment of their 10-year marriage. Sasha stood before the open titanium briefcase, the heavy, weathered leather portfolio resting heavily in his hands. The air in the room felt thick, tasting of aged paper and impending doom. He stared down at the chaotic, brilliant scribbles of Mark Stevens, the original architect of the algorithm that had built the Pemberton Tech empire. He traced the faded blue ink of the date stamp with a trembling finger, his heart hammering against his ribs in a terrifying, erratic rhythm. He was a master of legal maneuvering, a man who had built a lucrative career on constructing impenetrable fortresses of plausible deniability. But staring at the undeniable proof of his wife's monumental theft, Sasha realized with a sickening clarity that there was no legal loophole to exploit, no settlement to negotiate. He was trapped in a flawless, devastating checkmate orchestrated by 2 incredibly ruthless women. If he closed the briefcase, locked the vault, and walked away, Clementine's multi-billion-dollar merger would proceed seamlessly. He would remain the wealthy, respected lead counsel of a Silicon Valley titan. He would keep the ivory tower penthouse, the tailored suits, and the suffocating, transactional marriage. But he would also be actively complicit in a colossal fraud, forever haunted by the ghost of a dead man and the chilling knowledge that his entire life was built on a stolen foundation. If he took the portfolio and handed it to Ianthe, she would publish the explosive expose. The merger would instantaneously collapse, obliterating Clementine's legacy and fortune. But the blast radius would inevitably consume Sasha as well. The Bar Association would ruthlessly strip him of his license for failing to report the fraud and for a profound breach of attorney-client privilege. Clementine would execute every punitive clause of their draconian prenuptial agreement, leaving him utterly destitute. He would be trading his golden cage for absolute ruin, simply to hand a devastating victory to a woman who had meticulously seduced and manipulated him for revenge. Sasha sank heavily into the ergonomic leather chair, burying his face in his hands. The silence of the penthouse was deafening, pressing in on him from all sides. He thought of Clementine's cold, calculating eyes as she threatened him in the kitchen, her absolute certainty that he would prioritize his own survival above all else. He thought of Ianthe's dark, grief-stricken gaze across the table at the Blue Moon Bar, her chilling admission that his love was nothing more than a tactical advantage in her war of vengeance. He was entirely alone. He had never truly been a partner to Clementine, nor a lover to Ianthe. He was merely a heavily armored, highly functional tool they had both used to secure their ultimate objectives. Sasha slowly lifted his head, his eyes locking onto the sleek, industrial paper shredder sitting innocuously beside Clementine's massive glass desk. It was an industrial-grade machine, designed to reduce highly confidential corporate documents into entirely unreadable, microscopic confetti in a matter of seconds. He looked back down at the fragile, yellowed pages of Mark Stevens's legacy. The weight of the portfolio suddenly felt agonizingly heavy, a physical manifestation of the corruption rotting the core of his existence. He stood up, his jaw clenched, the decision crystallizing in his mind with a terrifying, absolute finality. The industrial paper shredder hummed with a low, menacing vibration that filled the sterile home office of the Ivory Tower penthouse. It was a mechanical beast, highly efficient and utterly unforgiving. Sasha stood before it, the heavy leather portfolio resting open in his hands. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and impending doom. He stared down at the chaotic, brilliant scribbles of Mark Stevens, the foundational code that had built the Pemberton tech empire and destroyed the man who had authored it. He thought of Clementine, her cold, calculating eyes staring him down in the kitchen, demanding his absolute loyalty to a billion-dollar lie. He thought of Ianthe, her dark, grief-stricken gaze across the table at the Blue Moon Bar, using his affection as a tactical weapon to avenge her dead fiancé. Both women had expertly weaponized his legal brilliance and his desperate need for connection to achieve their own ruthless ends. Sasha realized, with a profound, sickening clarity, that he was entirely expendable to both of them. He was not a partner. He was a highly functional, heavily armored tool, and tools were meant to be discarded when they no longer served their purpose. He slowly, deliberately, fed the first brittle page of Mark Stevens's foundational architecture into the shredder's silver maw. The machine whined, its steel teeth violently tearing the intricate equations into microscopic, unreadable confetti. The sound was deafening, a harsh, mechanical scream echoing through the cavernous penthouse. Sasha fed the second page, then the third, his face utterly devoid of emotion. He watched the physical proof of Clementine's monumental fraud, the very key to Ianthe's devastating expose, disintegrate into dust. He was not doing it to protect his wife's empire. He was not doing it to thwart Ianthe's revenge. He was doing it because he could no longer bear to be the executioner's axe for either of them. The lie had metastasized too deeply. It had rotted the core of his existence. If the multi-billion-dollar merger collapsed now, it would be because Clementine's entire foundation was fundamentally corrupt, not because Sasha had handed the murder weapon to her enemy. The shredder abruptly stopped, its silence heavy and absolute. The leather portfolio was empty. The ghost of Mark Stevens, and the devastating leverage it held, was gone. Sasha turned away from the glass desk, the crushing weight of his decision settling deeply into his bones. He walked out of the home office, leaving the door ajar, and stepped into the sprawling, geometric living room. The morning fog had entirely lifted, revealing the glittering, unforgiving San Francisco skyline stretching endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. He moved toward the sleek marble kitchen island. The espresso machine hissed softly in the background, a stark contrast to the profound silence of the penthouse. Sasha reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He drafted a single, terse email to the State Bar Association, formally resigning his license to practice law, effective immediately. He did not cite a reason. He simply attached his digital signature and hit send. He set the phone down on the pristine marble surface. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, he reached for his left hand. The gold wedding band felt incredibly heavy, a cold, suffocating shackle that had bound him to a decade of ruthless ambition and emotional starvation. He slid it off his finger. The metal clinked sharply against the marble, the sound ringing out in the empty room. He did not look back as he picked up his coat and walked toward the heavy oak front door of the penthouse. He stepped out into the quiet corridor, the air feeling shockingly thin, leaving behind the immense wealth, the devastating betrayals, and the ghost of a stolen legacy. The truth was, I never owned any of it. Not the patent, not her, and certainly not you.